Let's talk to Theo Usherwood, political commentator, see what he makes of it all. Theo, very good morning to you.
A very good morning to you, Mike. I was just your impressions was something else. I thought we should have a competition at some point. I thought it was fantastic. Only bettered by your correspondent who WhatsApped in.
Yes. Well, this is the thing. I mean, the people now who send us messages and who listen to the show and watch the show, they're totally buying into the ridicule that we have for this man, which can never be good, you know, because you can have people that don't like you, you can have people that do like you or who disagree with you or whatever. But once it gets to ridicule, which this got to pretty quick, I think it tells you all you need to know. And I mean, even the Daily Mail this morning on the front page are likening him to the George Lazenby of Prime Ministers. You know, the world's worst James Bond.
Yes, I think the problem the Prime Minister's got, he didn't, when he set out this, his milestones yesterday, is that he didn't actually put any firm targets in place. Now, why do Prime Ministers have targets? Why do they try and set out in a clear way exactly what they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve it? Is to ensure there's a narrative so the British public and British voters know what they are there to do. But you have to set clear targets on living standards. When it came to increasing household disposable income, he had no firm target about by how much we are going to be better off in 4.5 years' time. There was nothing on migration, either legal migration or illegal migration. We've had 20,000 migrants cross the English Channel just since Keir Starmer came to power, but there was no target in there about how by which number he's going to reduce that. We've got legal migration, net migration now north of 700,000 after the figure was actually revised up beyond 900,000. He said he just wants to reduce net migration, but there was no target, and it wasn't certainly included within his milestones yesterday. And if Keir Starmer isn't going to include it in his milestones, then do we assume that reducing migration, legal or otherwise, is not one of his priorities? And that is, of course, going to only open the door for Nigel Farage and Reform UK. And as you rightly say, they're now just slightly pulling ahead in the polls, and we're only 5 months into Keir Starmer's premiership.
Well, that's the thing. And you have to wonder, because we saw Pat McFadden last weekend doing the rounds on Sunday morning, talking about how we're not going to put a target on migration because, he effectively said, because we don't think it's achievable. He didn't actually say that in as many words, but that was clearly what he meant, that there's no point in putting a target on it because that's not our policy. But they can't completely ignore it, because that's the one issue that an awful lot of people are worked up about. I mean, I don't know if you saw Question Time last night, but Nigel Farage, I think, crossed a massive Rubicon last night. He appeared on Question Time and for the first time got an awful lot of support from the audience.
Yes, and usually, of course, when Nigel Farage appears on Question Time, he's pilloried by members of the audience. And you have to remember that for all its faults, Question Time has to be the panel, not just the panel, but has to be balanced, but the audience has to be balanced. It has to be reflective of the UK voting public. That's one of the conditions that Question Time has to adhere by. It can't just be all Reform voters or all Tory voters or Labour voters. They have to include a correct spread. So if Nigel Farage, you know, you could see it there when he appeared on Question Time, he's going on Question Time, and actually people are putting up their hands and asking questions, and he's receiving a relatively warm reception from the majority of the audience, then I think that's reflective perhaps of the growing support for the Reform leader. Now, Keir Starmer, he may not want to set a target because he doesn't think it's achievable, but if the whole point of setting targets is to prove your worth to the British public, and the British public are saying that they want you there to deal with the problem of immigration, then he's not willing to set a target. Then you have to ask yourself, and this is going to be the problem that I think his team is going to face, is what is the point? Why are you there? Why are you in number 10? If the British public voted you in for change, to make the country better, and they want you to deal with this particular problem, and you can't deal with this particular problem, then what is the point of you being there? Coca-Cola is set up as a company to sell cans of Coca-Cola. Mike Graham is a breakfast radio show host to give you a breakfast radio show. That's why you exist. Keir Starmer is Prime Minister to govern the country, and people expect something in return.
And he can't just dodge around the issues. Let's have a look at what Nigel Farage said about his speech last night. This is on Question Time.
So I sat and watched and listened to Keir Starmer's speech, and I was very pleased with myself. I managed to stay awake right until the very end, which, given how bland the delivery was, how scripted the whole thing was, how lacking in any sense of emotion or message delivery was remarkable. The 6 milestones doesn't even mention immigration, the boats, or anything. And I actually genuinely think that the milestones will become millstones as they fail on every single one of them.
And there was a huge round of applause for that after he said that, right? Let's have a look as well at one of the audience members in Question Time who talks about asylum in a way that hardly anybody ever has up to now.
As far as asylum goes?
I don't believe in any asylum. I really don't. I think we have taken more than our fair share in this country. I feel very sorry for the little towns, little villages that these people have been put, where people have lived all their lives, and they're frightened. They're absolutely frightened.
Do you feel sorry for the people who are fleeing war? Do you feel sorry for people fleeing persecution?
I think there's far too much made of this, that they're fleeing wars.
OK.
Right. All right. Jackie, you want... Thank you. Thank you.
Is there a war in Algeria? Is there a war in Morocco? Is there a war... Where are they coming from? Well, Syria?
And that's the thing. An awful lot of ordinary people now are making those feelings known, and Keir Starmer can't ignore them.
This is the problem, Mike. When you don't deal with the problem, you create a real hardening of opinion. So we're talking about countries, actually, and this is, the government's been very upfront about this, to that woman's point when she was speaking to Alistair Campbell there, of course, Tony Blair's former spin doctor. She had a fair point, because actually when you look at the Home Office figures, especially recent trends, we're seeing an increasing number of people coming from Vietnam. There isn't a war at the moment in Vietnam. We're also looking at the government looking to actually put funding into Kurdistan in order to stop migrants leaving Kurdistan. But is there a war in Kurdistan? No, there is not at the moment a war in Kurdistan. And what you have, when you don't deal with the problem, you actually create a hardening of opinion amongst voters like that woman who's saying, hold on a moment, this is something where we want you to get control, we want you to deal with it. And you end up with this woman saying, well, where is the asylum? Something I don't actually believe in. Now, I am sure there are legitimate cases amongst those crossing the English Channel of asylum. But when they get mixed up, when those cases get mixed up with people who are travelling across the English Channel for economic reasons, or they're coming from countries where there is actually there is political stability and they are not subject to persecution, you end up with voters like that saying, hold on a moment, I don't believe in the whole piece. Right. I want this dealt with. And Keir Starmer, in his speech yesterday, did not set out a plan to deal with net migration and to reach a particular target. And that is problematic. And it is something I think he is going to have to revisit in the next year if he wants to go back to the electorate in 2029 and ensure that he is not voted out of office.
Because it gives people the impression that he doesn't care about immigration. He doesn't mind how many people are coming in. I mean, we had a story this week, and this is a legal migration story, which absolutely blew my socks off, and it was from a former Border Force leader called Tony Smith, and he said, and he got this from a colleague of his last year, 3 Nigerian women came into the country having got social care visas, basically, to work in the care sector, but they came alongside them with 3 husbands, because obviously, you know, they were married, and between the 3 families, they had 15 children. So 21 people suddenly arrived into Britain for 3 women to do very, very low-paid jobs, which will end up, of course, with them being net takers from the public purse, you know, because they simply cannot generate enough income to provide enough tax to cover their own living expenses.
I was listening to a report earlier on this morning as I drove into work, and it was a report where you had a company, Mike, which would go to countries like Kurdistan to recruit workers to come and work on farms in this country. They were actively, their job, they had a license from the government to go abroad, to recruit workers, to provide them with the visas and the accommodation to come and do work in this country. And Keir Starmer, when he talked about his education plan, talked about it in terms of ensuring that there were children were ready for school when they reached the age of 5.
Yeah.
But he didn't talk about, in his education plan, making sure that firms had the right recruits coming out of school at 16 or 18 to fill the vacancies that they needed filling, so that they didn't have to go abroad or rely on these companies to go abroad to get migrant workers to come to this country on specific visas to do those jobs. And that's the problem, is that Keir Starmer spoke about a very small, narrow set of issues in his speech yesterday, setting out his milestones, but didn't deal with the fundamental problems about what is driving particularly legal migration with the visas and companies desperately needing workers to fill those visas, but not being able to draw those workers out of our domestic education system, which they currently can't, so therefore they have to go abroad.
And that is the problem. And unless he, as you say, all of the rest of it doesn't matter a row of beans at the end of the day, because it's really not that important to people, and people don't really believe it. You know, if you're going to tell us that you're going to get only 18 weeks to wait in 5 years for an operation, if all goes well, keep your fingers crossed, and maybe we'll build you a house. Keep your fingers crossed, maybe the streets will be safer. Keep your fingers crossed, maybe there'll be more people out and about so that you can talk to more police officers. You know, it's all nebulous, pie-in-the-sky rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And just sorry, I missed one point, because you made a very interesting point just in your previous question, Mike, where you talked about those migrants crossing the English Channel to come to this country and actually not being net contributors. Migration, and there was a report out earlier this year, contributes to an increase in GDP. But what it does not contribute to is an increase in GDP per capita, per head. So we are, to a man and a woman, poorer because we are bringing in people into this country to do low-skilled jobs. As a result of doing low-skilled jobs on low pay, they are paying low tax, low levels of tax, because of course you pay low levels of tax, rather than bringing in high net worth entrepreneurs from abroad to come and set up businesses in this country. But then again, if you look at the budget, what would be the incentive for one of those entrepreneurs to come into this country, set up a business when they have seen an increase in national insurance contributions for employers? We're making this country less competitive for leading lights in the world of business, captains of industry, to want to set up their businesses here in Britain rather than go elsewhere to countries like Italy or France or Germany or indeed the US or to the Far East. And that's the problem. It's, at the moment, it's the wrong type of immigration to support public services. And if we end up with people who are not net contributors to the system, then that means there is a greater burden on things like schools, the NHS and other public services.
Exactly right. Theo, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Theo Usherwood, political commentator there.